In recent events that have rattled the very foundations of American politics and unsettled global markets, a chain of decisions and dramatic displays of authority intertwined to create what many analysts now refer to as a profound systemic crisis. It began on an otherwise quiet night at 2 a.m. when a former U.S. president chose that exact moment to unleash a series of social media posts that bore an uncanny resemblance to the anguished outbursts of a heartbroken teenager. In less than an hour, more than 10 posts were fired off into the digital void, each tweet laden with aggressive rhetoric and inscrutable threats that mimicked the emotional turbulence of a bitter breakup. Among these posts, a particularly bombastic message emerged. If the EU and Canada were to team up, Trump would slap them with killer tariffs. This chilling declaration, issued without any formal speech or official statement, was emblematic of an unsettling transformation, from a presidential figure wielding credible power to an ex-leader whose impulsive midnight musings shook the international stage. The tone of these late-night messages resonated with shock and confusion, as if a man who once stood as a bastion of leadership had been reduced to an emotional echo of a bygone era of political theater. Questions abounded. Was this a strategic maneuver designed to misdirect public scrutiny amid deeply rooted domestic challenges? Or was it a sign of an individual increasingly unmoored from the demands of responsible governance? And if the latter were true, what did it reveal about the state of American leadership? The late-hour outbursts, with their undeniable mix of defiance and vulnerability, left many to wonder if the situation in the United States was being driven by circumstances far larger than any one man's fleeting emotional impulses. At 2 a.m., while most of America was still asleep, dreaming of better tomorrows, one former president's impulsive declarations rippled outwards, threatening to undo decades of carefully nurtured alliances and economic stability. As the day unfolded after these nocturnal declarations, the backlash from America's oldest allies was swift and unyielding. Within just 24 hours, global reactions began pouring in. Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, once a staunch Trump supporter, turned sharply, condemning the actions with a biting remark. "We'll make sure the U.S. feels the pain. I'm sorry for the American people, but this is on Trump." This rapid shift in tone was soon echoed by officials in France, the United Kingdom, and throughout the European Union, where many governments reaffirmed their commitment to forging a new trade alliance with Canada, intentionally excluding the United States. In a dramatic reversal of fortunes, allies that had once been considered part of an inseparable circle now found themselves on the fringes, untrusted and increasingly distant. One EU trade advisor even quipped, with a wry smile that underscored the gravity of the situation, "Trump used to host the party. Now he's locked outside the living room." Such remarks, laced with irony, highlighted the delicate balance in global diplomacy. In international politics, a single rash tweet can unravel years of trust and cooperation, leaving behind a legacy of uncertainty and isolation. Within the United States, the impact of these late-night threats went far beyond international relations. As political allies began distancing themselves and long-standing trade partnerships started showing fractures, the American economy found itself exposed to new risks and vulnerabilities. A survey conducted by the University of Michigan revealed that consumer confidence had plummeted to a 15-year low, even as everyday life was already being burdened by spiraling rent prices, stagnant wages, and the unrelenting pressure of inflation on household budgets. Analysts argued that these 2 a.m. posts were not merely spontaneous outbursts. They were calculated distraction tactics designed to divert attention from a deepening economic malaise. As a Bloomberg analyst famously summarized, "Make America great again? All we see is make recession real fast." In these uncertain times, the American wallet was screaming for stability, even as the nation's leadership appeared more focused on provocative gestures than on policies that could foster genuine recovery and growth. Beyond the immediate economic fallout, the implications of such erratic leadership extended into the realm of international defense and strategic partnerships. As the Trump administration's unpredictable rhetoric began to chip away at trust between long-standing allies, a critical review of America's defense policies forced many partners to reconsider their reliance on U.S.-made weapons and technology. In a sweeping strategic shift, Europe mobilized resources on an unprecedented scale, announcing an €800 billion program titled Readiness 2030. This initiative was more than a mere financial commitment. It was a declaration of intent by the EU to build resilience and reduce the over-reliance on American military technology. A move reminiscent of a breakup where the X is no longer seen as a safe harbor. European officials, some of whom harbored long-standing concerns about so-called kill switches embedded in U.S. weapon systems, began to question the reliability of sourcing military hardware from a nation where policy could change with the unpredictability of a midnight tweet. One prominent figure in the Danish Defense Committee, Rasmus Jarlov, issued a stark warning. "We can no longer trust the U.S." His remarks underscored a broader unease among defense officials, especially when it was revealed that the U.S. had contemplated selling toned-down, 10% reduced power versions of its weapons to allies. A proposition that seemed to trivialize the serious implications of national security in a charged geopolitical environment. While strategic alliances in defense were rapidly evolving, a separate battle was unfolding on the economic front, a battle that struck closer to home. On March 10, 2025, the U.S. administration shocked the world by imposing a 50% tariff on all Canadian imports. Unlike previous tariff policies, this new measure came with a condition so extreme that it seemed almost surreal. For the tariff to be lifted, Canada would have to become the 51st state of the United States. This unprecedented demand has sparked outrage across political, economic, and business circles, igniting a fierce debate about whether such a policy was a calculated strategic move or an act of economic self-sabotage. The two nations share deep economic ties. Total trade between the U.S. and Canada reached $793 billion in 2023, with Canada accounting for 14% of U.S. global trade and 75% of its own exports flowing directly to American markets. With critical industries such as oil and gas, aluminum, and lumber heavily dependent on this relationship, the imposition of such steep tariffs threatens to disrupt supply chains, raise production costs, and trigger a cascade of negative effects on both sides of the border. It is a policy move reminiscent of a teenager's ultimatums in a breakup, dramatic, irrational, and potentially devastating. Immediately following the tariff announcement, reactions from both sides of the border were swift and vehement. CNBC's chief economist, Steve Lehman, blasted the policy on live television, labeling it as pure insanity and questioning whether the U.S. government had any coherent strategy at all. The impact on financial markets was severe. Major indices revealed that within just 24 hours, the S&P 500 fell by 2.1%. Stock values of companies such as FedEx, General Motors, and Boeing dropped by between 3% and 5%, and the Canadian dollar suffered a drastic 4.3% devaluation. In what might seem like a darkly ironic twist, companies such as Apple, Tesla, Ford, and General Motors, entities whose production lines had long depended on Canadian parts, now found themselves confronted by the harsh realities of disrupted supply chains and ballooning consumer costs. It is almost as if the U.S., in an attempt to prove its dominance, ended up shooting itself in the foot. One might quip that if brilliance were measured in economic policy, this move would be the equivalent of trying to fix a leaking roof by throwing buckets at it, an effort that might just make a terrible mess even worse. Across the boards, American businesses and consumers bore the brunt of these uncertain policies. Rising costs, diminishing consumer confidence, and a troubling uptick in unemployment, especially in industries like manufacturing, agriculture, and retail, compounded the overall economic distress. CEOs and financial analysts warned that the combination of chaotic tariff policies and aggressive trade measures could usher in an extended period of economic recession. In commentary that underscored the gravity of the situation, prominent voices in the financial community decried the use of trade measures as tools for distraction at the expense of long-term economic stability. The general mood among investors became one of trepidation as market volatility grew and signs of economic contraction became increasingly evident. Meanwhile, traditional American workers, those who had once basked in a more predictable period of low unemployment and steady wages, began to face the stark reality of a market in freefall where prices loomed larger than their incomes and the future looked increasingly uncertain. Simultaneously, international economic experts from Europe, Japan, and Australia began weighing in on the dramatic policy shifts emerging from the United States. Their analyses painted a picture of a nation increasingly isolated on the global stage, where disconnects between domestic policy and international commitments sparked volatility, not just within America, but across the world. In an environment where major corporations were beginning to relocate production lines to Canada and the EU, the underlying message became clear. Political chaos is not a sustainable business model. One international analyst remarked, ever so sarcastically, that the situation had evolved into a trade war where the punchline wasn't so funny after all. Such comments, though laced with irony, underscored a grim reality. The backbone of global economic stability, the trust forged over decades, was now deteriorating under the weight of erratic decision-making and far-fetched ultimatums. Amidst this whirlwind of political theatrics and economic upheaval, there emerged a broader narrative that touched on the essence of leadership and governance. For decades, America had prided itself on providing not only military and economic might, but also a degree of predictability and strategic clarity in its foreign policy. However, as evidenced by the recent series of midnight tweets and unprecedented tariff conditions, the fabric of this leadership began to fray. When a leader chooses to engage in late-night social media outbursts rather than address pressing domestic and international challenges with sober deliberation, the repercussions extend far beyond political optics. They ripple through financial markets, erode the trust of long-standing allies, and ultimately leave ordinary citizens to contend with the fallout. As corporate giants and global investors scrambled to recalibrate their strategies, the American people faced a future where stability had been replaced by uncertainty, and where promises made in the dark were quickly proving to be nothing more than ephemeral distractions. In this climate of mistrust and instability, it is essential to ask whether the choices made in the corridors of power truly reflect the interests of the nation. In one instance, while Trump appeared to vanish from press conferences and scheduled public appearances, leaving behind unanswered questions and mounting economic woes, the country was forced to bear the brunt of a deepening recession. Critics noted that before his ascent, the economy was characterized by low unemployment, rising wages, and robust consumer confidence. In stark contrast, following a series of erratic policy decisions, the nation found itself hurtling toward a crisis marked by a nearly 10% plunge in the U.S. stock market over 6 months, widespread job losses, and an emerging trade war that jeopardized familiar alliances. Leadership in times of crisis is measured not by the volume of tweets at 2 a.m., but by the ability to inspire confidence, promote effective strategies, and safeguard the welfare of every citizen. Yet in this period of profound uncertainty, it appears that the emphasis has shifted from long-term national interest to momentary displays of defiance and impulsive retaliation. It is within this tumultuous context that we cannot help but reflect on the broader implications of these events for the future of global geopolitics. The actions of a single individual, amplified by the instantaneous reach of social media, have the capacity to unsettle entire economies and reshape strategic alliances. In the wake of these developments, major U.S. companies, Tesla, Apple, GM, are quietly relocating key segments of their production lines to Canada and the European Union in a bid to insulate themselves from the unpredictability of U.S. economic policy. Meanwhile, European governments, recognizing the need for greater strategic autonomy, have already begun distancing themselves from American defense commitments with programs like Readiness 2030, an €800 billion initiative designed to foster an independent security framework free from the vagaries of U.S. policy shifts. This recalibration of priorities has sparked discomfort among those long accustomed to America's leadership on the global stage, raising critical questions about the nation's ability to maintain its influence when its policies appear as mercurial as a series of midnight rants. Of course, it would be remiss not to note that in the midst of these sweeping policy changes and dramatic shifts in alliance, there remain those who find a touch of irony in the unfolding drama. It almost seems as if the former president is inadvertently orchestrating a performance where political theater collides with the harsh realities of economic survival. One might even joke that his 2 a.m. tweets are the modern equivalent of a stage actor forgetting his lines mid-performance. Except in this case, the stakes involve billions of dollars, international alliances, and the very future of American jobs. Such irony underscores the deep disconnect between bold promises and the underlying instability that threatens to unravel carefully constructed economic structures. In moments like these, when the future of not only a nation but global commerce hangs in the balance, it is important to remember that voices of reason and caution are needed. I invite you to join our community to stay informed and engaged. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel for more in-depth analysis and timely updates. Your likes, comments, and shares help us continue to deliver insightful coverage on these critical issues. And we value every bit of feedback as we strive to bring clarity amid the chaos. Looking ahead, the critical questions remain. Is this sudden pivot away from established alliances a calculated strategy designed to reassert American sovereignty? Or is it simply a reckless gamble that endangers not only domestic stability, but also the future of global economic cooperation? Are these dramatic gestures a bid to distract from deeper economic problems, or the result of a leadership style that is fundamentally at odds with the demands of a modern globalized economy? Your thoughts are extremely important. What do you believe are the long-term consequences of these actions? And how should not only America, but the world respond in times of such deep uncertainty? Share your views in the comments below as we continue this dialogue on the state of political leadership and economic resilience. As we piece together the events that have led to the current state of turmoil, it is clear that the consequences of these policy decisions extend far beyond the immediate headlines. The disruption to trade relationships, the recalibration of defense strategies, and the accelerated flight of companies seeking stability are all signs of a seismic shift in the geopolitical landscape. With America's closest allies now rethinking long-standing partnerships, and with economic indicators signaling a downturn that could well spiral into a full-blown recession, one cannot help but wonder if the nation is witnessing the beginning of a fundamental transformation in global order. In this moment of reckoning, stability, and trust, once the bedrock of international relations, are being replaced by a climate of caution, uncertainty, and, dare we say, a tinge of self-inflicted isolation. The administration's recent silence on what should have been a day of meaningful action and public reassurance only deepens the sense of disorientation among ordinary citizens. Scheduled appearances by Trump were conspicuously canceled, leaving a void in leadership at a time when reassurance and decisive action were desperately needed. As markets faltered and consumer confidence sank to unprecedented lows, the absence of a guiding, steady voice made the unfolding crisis even more acute. Critics argue that when leadership chooses to vanish rather than address pressing challenges, it reflects a broader failure to acknowledge and respond to the realities faced by everyday Americans. The repercussions are not confined to fiscal charts and economic forecasts. They manifest in the struggles of families forced to contend with rising living costs, workers facing job insecurity, and communities grappling with the fallout of erratic policy choices. Throughout history, transformative crises have often served as wake-up calls, revealing vulnerabilities in systems that once seemed invincible. Today, the unraveling of established alliances and the erosion of public confidence point to a turning moment in America's narrative. This crisis is not merely one of tariffs or social media missteps. It is a multifaceted challenge that touches upon every aspect of national and global life, from defense and economic policy to international diplomacy and domestic stability. The cumulative effect of these missteps and the apparent abdication of long-held strategic commitments is nothing short of alarming. The stark reality is that when a nation's leadership appears to be more concerned with provocative social media antics than with pragmatic, forward-looking policies, the repercussions are felt across boardrooms, battlefields, and dinner tables alike. In reflecting on these events, it is essential to appreciate the gravity of the decisions at hand and the manner in which they have reshaped the landscape of modern governance. At a time when global cooperation and consistent strategy are more important than ever, the capricious nature of these policies leaves little room for the stability required to navigate an increasingly interconnected world. As financial institutions, major corporations, and even longtime allies begin to distance themselves, the cost of such erratic decisions becomes ever more apparent. The message is clear. True leadership demands a steady hand, a coherent vision, and above all, an unwavering commitment to the long-term welfare of the people it serves, qualities that seem to be in short supply amid the chaos of impulsive declarations and retaliatory tariffs. While the current scenario might provoke laughter at its absurdities, a 2 a.m. Rant that results in the unwitting isolation of a nation, or a tariff policy that reads more like the ultimatum of an overbearing parent than a calculated economic measure. It also calls for sober reflection. In moments like these, one cannot help but wonder whether the irony of the situation is lost on those initiating it. After all, when your policy toolkit resembles a teenager's breakup text, one must question if you truly understand the far-reaching consequences of your actions. This irony, as biting as it may be, serves as a reminder that the stakes are far too high for such cavalier approaches to leadership. Ultimately, the unfolding drama is a call for a renewed commitment to reasoned governance, a reminder that policies affecting millions should be the product of careful deliberation, not impulsive reactions born of personal vendettas or short-term distractions. As global dynamics continue to shift and alliances are redrawn, only a measured, thoughtful approach can ensure that a nation recovers from the destabilizing effects of erratic decision-making. The consequences of these choices are already being felt in declining consumer confidence, faltering markets, and strained international relationships. In a world where stability is synonymous with progress, the increasing isolation of the United States serves as a cautionary tale for all who believe that power without responsibility can be sustained indefinitely. In conclusion, the series of events, from a former president's anguished 2 a.m. social media outbursts to an audacious 50% tariff on Canadian imports conditioned upon an unimaginable political demand, paints a portrait of a nation at a crossroads. The dramatic shift in international alliances, the cascading economic repercussions, and the palpable sense of uncertainty among global partners all point to a simple truth. Leadership, when abandoned in favor of theatrical posturing, leaves behind a legacy of instability and isolation. As we navigate this uncertain terrain, it is clear that the American people deserve a path forward built on consistent, principled policies rather than fleeting nightly rants and retaliatory economic theatrics. What are your thoughts on this tumultuous mix of political theatrics and economic fallout? Do you believe that such dramatic policy measures can ever truly serve the nation's long-term interests? Or are they simply a recipe for further isolation and instability? Please share your views in the comments below, and let's engage in a thoughtful discussion on the way forward for American leadership in these challenging times. The events of recent months have forced a profound reassessment of what it takes to lead a nation in a globalized world. Amid a swirl of misguided strategies and imprudent decisions, the undeniable need for stability and long-term planning has never been more evident. As the dust slowly settles on the fallout from these midnight declarations and extreme tariff policies, both domestic industries and international allies are left to contemplate a future defined not by impulsive gestures, but by a robust and united commitment to progress. The crisis that has unfolded is a stark lesson in the importance of measured, responsible governance, a lesson that resonates far beyond political borders and financial markets, touching the very core of what it means to lead with integrity in times of adversity. It remains to be seen whether the United States can recover from the tumult it has sown through erratic and often damaging policies. What seems undeniable, however, is that this moment in history will be remembered not for the promises of grandeur or empty rhetoric, but for the tangible and lasting consequences of a leadership that lost sight of the fundamental principles of accountability and foresight. As we all stand at this critical juncture, the choices made in the coming months will determine whether America can once again inspire confidence, both at home and abroad, or whether it will continue on a path that increasingly isolates it from the very partnerships that once underpinned global prosperity. In these uncertain times, we are reminded that the true measure of leadership lies not in the dramatic flair of a midnight tweet, but in the steady, deliberate actions that secure a nation's future. Let this serve as both a warning and a call to action for those in power to recognize the profound responsibility they bear, and for all of us to remain vigilant and engaged as we work towards a more stable and secure tomorrow.